Mark thought he was just a bored pensioner until he saw the lens pointed right at the headboard of his bed. At least, that was the conclusion he would eventually reach. But in the beginning, it was just a nagging suspicion, a splinter in the mind that refused to work its way out. He lived in a quiet suburb of Seattle, the kind of place where the houses were separated by narrow strips of manicured lawn and 6-foot fences that offered the illusion of privacy rather than the reality of it. Mark, a freelance copy editor who spent most of his days hunching over a dual-monitor setup in his living room, had always appreciated the silence of the neighborhood. His neighbor to the left, Mr. Evans, was a fixture of that silence. Evans was a man in his late 70s, possessing a shuffling gait, a wardrobe consisting entirely of beige cardigans, and a seemingly endless list of minor home repairs. The trouble began on a Tuesday. Mark had stepped away from his desk to stretch his back and get a glass of water. As he passed the window of his upstairs bedroom, the one that faced the narrow alleyway between the houses, he saw the top of a ladder. It was Mr. Evans again. The old man was perched precariously on the aluminum rungs, fiddling with the gutter that ran along the side of his garage. This was not the first time. It was not even the third time. By Mark's count, Mr. Evans had been repairing that specific 3-foot section of PVC piping every afternoon for the past 2 weeks. Mark stood back from the glass, sipping his water, watching through the sheer curtains. Evans was not hammering. He was not clearing leaves. It was mid-July, and the trees were green and full. He was just tinkering. His hands moved with a strange, deliberate slowness around the bracket where the gutter met the roofline. Then the old man froze. He did not look down at his feet or at the tools in his belt. He looked straight ahead, directly into Mark's bedroom window. Mark instinctively took a step back, his heart giving a singular, hard thump against his ribs. The distance between the houses was less than 20 feet. Even through the reflection of the afternoon sun on the glass, it felt like Evans was making eye contact. But that was impossible. The glare would be blinding from the outside. Mark shook it off. "You've been working too hard," he told himself. He's just an old guy trying to feel useful. But the feeling did not leave. Later that night, Mark lay in bed, the sheets tangled around his legs. The summer heat was oppressive, and he had cracked the window open to catch a breeze. The silence of the night was broken only by the distant hum of the highway and the rhythmic chirping of crickets. Then he heard it. Scrape, clink, metal on metal, faint, but distinct, came from outside, from the alleyway. Mark sat up, his breath catching in his throat. He crept to the window and peered through the blinds. The alley was pitch black, swallowed by the shadow of the 2 houses. He could not see the ladder, but he could sense presence. The air felt heavy, charged with an attention that was directed solely at him. The next morning, the unease had hardened into a knot of anxiety. Mark could not focus on his editing. Every time he tried to read a paragraph, his eyes drifted to the window. He needed to know. The uncertainty was paralyzing him, turning his sanctuary into a cage. He made a choice. He could go over there, knock on the door, and ask Mr. Evans if everything was okay with his roof. That would be the polite, neighborly thing to do. It would also alert Evans that Mark was watching. Or he could confirm his suspicions first. Mark drove to a sporting goods store 3 towns over and bought a pair of high-powered binoculars. He felt ridiculous standing in the checkout line like a paranoid cliché, but the image of Evans on that ladder would not leave his head. When he got home, he set up his station. He turned off all the lights in the bedroom, pulled the blackout curtains almost shut, leaving only a sliver of space, and positioned himself on a stool in the corner of the room. He waited. At 4:15 p.m., right on schedule, the garage door next door rattled open. Mr. Evans emerged carrying the ladder. Mark lifted the binoculars. The optics were crisp, magnifying the old man's face until every liver spot and wrinkle was visible. He watched as Evans set up the ladder with practiced ease. The old man climbed, his breathing heavy, his movements stiff. When he reached the top, he did not pull out a hammer. He did not pull out a wrench. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small microfiber cloth. Mark adjusted the focus wheel. Evans began to polish the underside of the gutter bracket. He rubbed it gently, almost lovingly. Then he stopped. He turned his head. Through the magnified lenses, Mark saw it happen. Mr. Evans looked directly at the sliver of space in the curtains where Mark was hiding. He did not just look, he stared. And then, slowly, the corners of the old man's mouth twitched upward. It was not a friendly smile. It was a look of recognition. He knew. He had known the whole time. The realization hit Mark like a physical blow. He dropped the binoculars, the heavy rubber casing thudding against the carpet, and scrambled back into the shadows of the hallway. His breath came in shallow, jagged gasps. He saw me. He knows I am watching him watch me. Mark spent the rest of the evening in the downstairs kitchen, pacing the linoleum floor. Logic tried to reassert itself. Maybe he just saw a glint of the lens, Mark reasoned. Maybe he was smiling at a bird. But the memory of that smile, tight, dry, and devoid of warmth, curdled in his stomach. Over the next 3 days, Mark's life devolved into a game of cat and mouse where he was not sure who was the cat. He stopped sleeping in his bedroom. He dragged his mattress into the living room, sleeping on the floor away from any windows that faced the Evans property. He tried to catch Evans in the act again, but the dynamic had shifted. Mr. Evans no longer climbed the ladder. Instead, he began to occupy his backyard with aggressive normalcy. He would sit in a lawn chair facing Mark's house, reading a paperback book for hours. He would water his hydrangeas, the hose nozzle pointed vaguely toward Mark's kitchen, the water arching like a silver bridge between their properties. Mark's work suffered. He missed deadlines. He ignored emails. He spent his hours reviewing the footage from a cheap dashboard camera he had rigged up in the kitchen window, but it showed nothing incriminating, just an old man living out his twilight years. "You losing it," Mark whispered to himself on the 4th day. He had not shaved, and the dark circles under his eyes made him look like a phantom. "You turning into the creepy neighbor." He decided to test reality. He had to prove that this was all in his head. That night, Mark forced himself to sleep in his own bed. He enacted a strict routine. He checked the window locks 3 times. He pulled the blackout curtains tight, using binder clips to seal the gap in the middle, so not a single photon of light could escape or enter. He created a tomb of darkness. He lay in bed, staring up at the invisible ceiling. "S fine," he told himself. "S just a house. Yes, just a man." Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of eyes floating in the dark, unblinking and wet. He woke up with a start. The room was silent. The digital clock on the nightstand read 3:33 a.m. The air was still, but the temperature had dropped. Mark rolled over, intending to go to the bathroom, when he froze. A beam of pale, sickly light was cutting across the room. It sliced through the darkness, landing directly on the floor by his bed. Mark turned his head slowly toward the window. The binder clips were gone. The curtains were parted, not by much, maybe 2 inches, but enough to destroy the sanctity of the room. Had he forgotten to clip them? No. He remembered the snap of the metal. He remembered checking it. Mark lay paralyzed, his heart hammering against the mattress. The light was not moonlight. The angle was wrong. It was artificial. It was steady. Summoning a reservoir of courage he did not know he had, Mark slid out of bed, keeping low to the floor. He crawled toward the window, avoiding the beam of light. He reached the wall and slowly, agonizingly, raised his head to peek through the gap. Across the alley, Mr. Evans' house was dark. The garage was a black shape against the night sky. But there, right where the gutter met the roofline, the spot Evans had polished so carefully, something was glowing. It was not a reflection. It was a tiny infrared emitter. The faint red ring was invisible during the day, but in the pitch black of night, it pulsed like a heartbeat. And right in the center of that red ring was the glint of glass. Mark felt a wave of nausea wash over him. It was not a drain pipe. It was a housing, a custom-built, disguised enclosure for a camera. And the worst part was not the camera itself. It was the realization of what had happened to the curtains. The window was locked from the inside. The clips were on the floor. Mark looked closer at the window frame. The latch was engaged. But then he saw the scratch marks on the outside of the sill. Thin, metallic scratches. Like something thin and rigid had been slid up between the sash and the frame to manipulate the clips. No, that was impossible. Unless the window had not been locked as securely as he thought. Or unless Evans had a key. Mark backed away, his hands trembling. He was not safe. The walls of his house were paper, and his privacy was a delusion. He sat in the hallway, clutching his knees, waiting for the sun to rise. The feeling of violation was absolute. He was not just being watched, he was being curated. The morning sun brought no relief, only a cold, hard clarity. Mark did not call the police. Not yet. He played out the conversation in his head. "Officer, my neighbor has a gutter that looks at me." They would look at the locked doors, the lack of forced entry, and the frantic gleam in Marcus' eyes, and they would write him off. He needed proof. Indisputable physical proof. He watched Mr. Evans leave at 10 o'clock a.m. The old man drove his beige sedan down the street, presumably heading to the grocery store or the pharmacy. It was Saturday. Mark knew Evans' routine. He would be gone for exactly 1 hour. Mark grabbed a flashlight and a pry bar from his utility closet. He felt a detached sense of calm, the kind that comes when there are no other options left. He walked out his back door, crossed the narrow strip of grass, and hopped the low chain-link fence into Evans' yard. He went straight for the garage. It was a detached structure, separated from the main house by a concrete patio. The side door was old wood, the paint peeling in long gray strips. Mark tried the handle. Locked. He jammed the pry bar into the frame. He did not care about noise anymore. He did not care about property damage. He shoved his weight against the bar. Wood splintered with a dry crack, and the door swung inward. Mark stepped inside. The air in the garage was stale, smelling of sawdust, gasoline, and something else. Something warm and electric. The space was tidy, almost clinically so. Tools hung on pegboards in size order. But the back wall was different. A heavy black curtain partitioned off the rear third of the garage. Mark crossed the concrete floor, his footsteps echoing. He reached out and pulled the curtain aside. He gasped. It was not a workbench. It was a command center. A bank of servers hummed on a metal rack, their cooling fans whirring in the silence. Cables ran along the walls like black veins, converging on a desk dominated by 3 large, high-definition monitors. Only one monitor was on. Mark walked toward it, his legs feeling like lead. The screen displayed a static black and white image. It took his brain a moment to interpret the shapes and shadows. It was a landscape of fabric, valleys and hills of white cotton. It was a pillow. Mark leaned closer, his breath fogging in the cool air of the garage. The clarity of the image was terrifying. He could see the thread count of the pillowcase. He could see a single stray hair resting on the fabric. He recognized the pattern on the pillowcase. It was his. The camera was not just pointed at his window. It was zoomed in with surgical precision, bypassing the glass, the distance, and the darkness to focus specifically, obsessively, on the exact spot where his head lay every night. Marcus' hand trembled as he reached for the mouse. He needed to see if it was recording. He clicked the File Explorer icon. A window opened, revealing a folder named Subject 04 Mark. Mark clicked it. Hundreds of video files spilled down the screen, dated by day and time. Sleep 01. Sleep 02. Wake up. Nightmare. He clicked a file from 2 nights ago. The video player opened. There was Mark tossing and turning. The camera's night vision made his skin look gray, his eyes like hollow pits. He watched himself sleeping, vulnerable and unaware. He closed the folder and saw the directory tree on the left. Subject 03 Sarah. Subject 02 David. Subject 01 Unknown. The archives went back years. Years of tenants. Years of sleeping faces. Intimate moments. Undressing. Crying. Living. Evans had not just been watching Mark. He had been collecting the neighborhood, stealing their most private moments and archiving them in this dusty garage. Mark reached for his phone to call the police, but his eyes caught movement on the screen. The live feed. The pillow was gone. The camera angle was panning. It moved smoothly, electronically controlled, sweeping away from the bed, across the floor, toward the bedroom window. Then the screen flickered, and the view changed. It was not the bedroom anymore. It was a high-angle shot looking down. Mark saw a messy workbench. He saw the black curtain, and he saw a man standing in front of the monitors, looking at the screen. He saw the top of his own head. Mark spun around, looking up at the rafters of the garage. A small, black dome camera was mounted directly above him, its red LED blinking rapidly. A voice crackled through a small speaker on the desk. "You really should not be in here, Mark. It ruins the authenticity of the data." The voice was Evan's, but it was not the frail, wavering voice of an old man. It was cold, steady, and terrifyingly lucid. Mark scrambled backward, tripping over his own feet, the pry bar clattering to the concrete floor. He did not look for the speaker. He did not answer. He turned and bolted for the broken side door. The police would not understand. Evan's voice followed him, calm and reasoned, as if he were explaining a complex equation. "I'm preserving you. I'm keeping watch." Mark burst out into the sunlight, the brightness blinding him for a second. He expected to see Evan standing there with a weapon, but the yard was empty. The sedan was still gone. Evans was watching remotely. He was watching from his phone, from the store, from wherever he was. Mark did not stop. He vaulted the fence, tearing his jeans on the chain link, and sprinted into his house. He locked the door, slammed the deadbolt, and backed into the corner of the kitchen where there were no windows. His hands shook so violently he dropped his phone twice before he managed to dial 911. "He's filming me," Mark stammered to the operator, his voice cracking. "He has servers. He has everything." The next hour was a blur of flashing lights and squawking radios. When the patrol cars arrived, Mark pointed them to the garage. He waited on his front porch, wrapped in a blanket despite the heat, watching the officers disappear into Evan's backyard. 10 minutes later, Mr. Evans pulled into the driveway. Mark watched as the officers approached the car. He expected a struggle. He expected the monster from the speaker. Instead, he saw a confused, trembling old man step out of the beige sedan. Evans looked at the police, then at Mark, his eyes wide and watery with confusion. I do not understand," Evans stammered, his voice rising in a pitch of geriatric panic. "S for security. The neighborhood is not safe. I wanted to make sure they were safe." The police seized the hard drives. They found the cameras, not just the one in the gutter, but 3 others hidden in birdhouses and fence posts. They found the archives, but the justice Mark craved never came. There was no trial. There was no public shaming. Mr. Evans was diagnosed with advanced dementia and a severe paranoid delusion disorder. His lawyer argued,